All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello, and welcome to the Photo Work Podcast, the talky and touchy-feely version of my book, Photo Work, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. I am Sasha Wolf, recording today from the home studio on West 88th Street, back in New York City. And I am joined virtually as usual by a man whose dog is his third child, which is completely understandable. Michael.
I'm not even sure a third.
First? Is your dog your first child?
I know I'm not going to rank.
Just did. You just did. Michael Chauvin Dalton. Hello, Michael.
Hello there.
How are you?
Better than I was 2 weeks ago.
Are you wearing your Joe Biden t-shirt?
No, but we just took down our Biden-Harris lawn sign because my wife Cynthia wants to save it for history.
Yeah.
And
nice.
We also thought maybe, with the few Trump voters that are on our block, we might be rubbing it in a little bit at this point, even though Trump has not conceded. Also, we were a little concerned that if we left it up too long, it might end up getting defaced.
Oh, God. That's depressing.
Yes.
Wah, wah.
Yes, it is.
Oh, well. All right. Well, we did win.
Yes. Even with all the denial we are hearing, it is pretty undeniable.
Yeah, it's undeniable. Oh, and Michael, before I forget, which would be criminal, let me just remind our listeners that if they go to the Aperture website to pick up some books, when they go to checkout, if they put in Photo Work 30 in the discount code section, they will get 30% off Aperture books.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's important.
That is important. Such a good deal. All right. Well, so we have a very fun show today. It's our 10th episode. So for our celebration, we are answering listener questions.
Yes.
Yep. So I think we got a lot of really great questions. We might even keep this as sort of a feature in the podcast and just sort of roll it in somehow, answer a question or two per episode, because we do feel like the questions are really thoughtful and whatnot. So anyway, well, instead of having a long intro, why don't we get to it?
Yes.
So Michael, if you don't mind, take it away.
My pleasure. And here is my conversation with you. Sasha Wolf, hello and welcome to the Photo Work Podcast. Thank you for being on today.
Well, thank you for having me, Michael. It's an honor to
Is it an honor to be on your own show?
Actually, it is. If I'm being really honest, it is.
Well, so we have some questions for you from our great listeners. And let me preface this by saying there were some questions that really overlapped or were almost the same questions. So we just picked some of them. And so if you asked a similar question, we know you did. And thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Well, our first question is from Natalie. And Natalie writes, Dear Sasha, what do you expect from an artist showing you their work concerning quality and concerning the theme? Would you only want to see like landscape photographers or would you be open? What tells you if a work will sell or be accepted at the market? Best from Germany.
Okay. Thank you, Natalie. And, or I should say, Dankeschön.
That's going to be tough to keep that going.
That's all I got. That's the extent of my German. So, yep, these are good questions. What do I expect from an artist as far as quality?
The quality.
Yep. I expect flawlessness. So if we're talking about the print, I don't know, Natalie, if that's what you're talking about. I mean, but I'm going to address it as if you're talking about the print, because I'm an art dealer, I am selling an object, and that object has to be perfect. I'm asking a lot of money, first of all, for this object, but I'm also asking my clients to trust me and in order for me to feel totally comfortable in that respect, I need to know that my artists have done their absolute best to deliver a perfect object, a perfect print. So if I do get a print and I don't think it's good enough, it goes back to the artist. At this point in my career, that doesn't happen anymore, or it's extremely rare. It did happen earlier on in my career where my artists were younger and less experienced, but that's sort of a thing of the past, thank God. And as far as theme, look, let me just say this because I think it's important. Landscape photography does sell way more than portrait photography. So there are two different kinds of people who are buying work, two major categories of people who go to an art dealer to buy work. One is a hardcore collector, and those are people whose collections will probably wind up in a museum. And most of the work that they buy is in flat files or some sort of storage system. The other, because they have too much of it, the other type of person who buys work from me is someone who is decorating their house. They may take it very seriously, but they can't go beyond their wall space. And those people generally do not buy portraiture. There are a lot of exceptions, and I could list them, sort of the more, really aestheticized something is, the more, there's an ambulance going by. I'm sorry. I can hear that. I hope it's not bothering all of you out there. But, I certainly, I have some work by Eleanor Carucci that is so exquisite and or, extremely, sensual, and there's a sexiness to it. And, people would be more interested in that. But a sort of very straightforward, tough portrait that's contemporary is harder for people. If it's vintage, so it's a portrait by Walker Evans, let's say, or Dorothea Lange, that's different. And I could talk a lot about why that's different, but I do think it's pretty obvious.
It has a lot to do with we're so far removed.
Right? That's right.
Yeah.
So, it becomes historical. Also, it has an old-timey quality. It's like when you watch an old movie.
Right.
But I don't choose who I represent based on whether it's landscape photography primarily or portraiture primarily. I base it on just whether I'm connecting with the work and whether I think the work is really good. I have a lot of both that I deal with. And
then the last question was, what tells you if a work will sell, be accepted at the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of a bit in the previous answer. I mean, I definitely know that like pieces that can be really large and sort of be like room makers, like, that they're going to absolutely make a room. They're just going to make a really big statement, are easier to sell.
Right.
Period. It's really not that complicated.
Yeah. And then, of course, you did answer a part of that question with the idea of, how challenging do you want something on your wall to be too, right? Yeah.
I mean, let me also just say that there are people who are in the middle of those two groups. I mean, I have clients who aren't, amassing these massive collections that are going to wind up at major museums, but are still really interested in living with very challenging work. Those people do exist. They're really wonderful and really fun to work with, but they're not the norm.
Yeah. All right. Are you ready for the next one?
I am.
Okay. This is from Ileana. Hi, Sasha. I would like to know more about working with a dealer. Is a dealer the best way to reach collectors? How do you find a trustworthy dealer? Thank you.
That's a really good question. Thank you, Ileana. So I think that this is changing a lot. I actually think that you do not need a dealer anymore. I think dealers are great for giving you a solo show once every 2 years or 3 years, whatever their schedule is. Look, I'm very pro art dealer. I am an art dealer.
That's right.
I'm a self-loathing. No, I'm very proud of what I do. But I don't think it's necessary anymore. I mean, there are a lot of, really heavy hitters in the fine art photography world right now who do not have dealers. And they're doing just fine. I mean, some of them I know would like to have dealers, and so they may not, think it's an ideal situation, but I think they're actually really well positioned. Yeah, I'm just trying to think about, whether or not to name names. I'm not going to, but because I don't know how these people would feel about it. If I had their permission, I could go ahead and do that. But there are a lot of people right now who are the recipients of a lot of awards, Guggenheims and more, and do a lot of important residencies and have really important book projects and are in, some upcoming important museum exhibitions, and they do not have dealers. So, and the reason they don't have dealers is, I think there's a couple of reasons. One, there are way less photography dealers than there were 10 years ago. And there are very few photo-only galleries opening now. Like when I started, there were a lot of photo-only galleries opening. That's not the case anymore. So there's way less slots available. And two, I think that, the cost of doing business is so high that for a lot of dealers, it's scarier and scarier to take on work that they think will be really difficult to sell. And a lot of the people I'm thinking of make really challenging work. And so I think the dealers are worried about whether they can move it.
Right.
But I think that something really interesting has happened, which is that there's so many amazing small book publishers now doing incredible work that those books that are being published are taking the place of exhibitions. It's not the same thing. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but I actually think having a really good book published when you're trying to move your career forward by a good publisher is better for you than having a solo show, at some sort of like low or mid-tier gallery that comes and goes in 6 weeks. I actually think having a book out that really takes off and winds up in a lot of people's homes and in the collections of a lot of museums and sort of on the radar of a lot of people in the industry is the most effective tool right now. And so this just explosion of small book publishers, I think, has really changed things up and given people the opportunity to launch their careers that way. And that's what I'm seeing happen with a lot of people.
That came up in your conversation with Leslie Martin about how to get noticed, right? And one of the things you both spoke about was the self-publishing world and how a successful self-published book can really get your name and your images out there.
Yep, absolutely. Whether it's self-published or whether it's published by one of the, small or mid-tier publishing companies. I mean, you saw someone like Greg Halpern explode on the scene with his book Zizix.
Right.
Doug Dubois, who I represent now but wasn't represented for a long time, has, two of the, I think, most important photo books of the past 20 years. Someone like Christine Potter. There are a lot of people working now who are just exploding on the scene with incredible book projects. And I'm all in on that.
Yeah. Oh, and trustworthy dealer.
Trustworthy. Look, I mean, I think you can ask around, and I think most dealers are trustworthy. You may not like them. That's a whole different story. I mean, in my experience with my colleagues, the trustworthy dealer is by far the norm. People have reputations, and people talk. There's a lot of gossip. If you're at all shady, that gets around. So,
right.
I don't think
it is a gossipy world.
It's very gossipy. I don't think people are being shady. Now, you have to figure out what type of relationship you want with the dealer, as we've talked about on the show, and I'm known for my way of working. I work in a way that's very warm and connected with my artists because that's the relationship I'm interested in. not everyone's like that. Not everyone's like sort of like mom. But there are a lot of people who don't want that relationship. There are artists who don't, who want just a sort of much more business relationship. So you have to figure out what kind of relationship you want and then find the dealer that matches what you're after. But I think most people are trustworthy.
All right. Should we go to the next?
Yeah, hit me.
Okay. This is from Matthew. Hi, Sasha. Back in the day, photographers such as Frank, Levitt, Friedlander, Eggleston. I'm going to pause a minute here for those of you. This is a real maybe city mouse, country mouse scenario. You have ambulances going by. Yeah. I have incredibly loud leaf blowers working right now in my neighbor's yard.
Okay, I want to just throw in one other thing that you may or may not have heard, which is that Peanut just got home about 5-10 minutes ago into my last answer and was weeping outside the door on the other side of the recording studio. So I actually almost lost my train of thought. It was so overly dramatic. So I don't know if you heard that, but
yeah. So yeah, we don't know yet what's coming through the microphones exactly, no. But I'm looking at my levels. Every once in a while, I get a little bump of a leaf blower going.
Leaf blowers, ambulances, and weeping dogs.
Take it all in, folks.
I mean,
all right,
Peanut can make it sound as if she's being murdered on the other side, murdered in some horrible. When all is happening is that she can't get to me.
That's right. All right, let's get back to Matthew's question.
Yep.
So back in the day, photographers such as Frank, Levitt, Friedlander, Eggleston, etc., basically had the whole field to themselves. They stood out. It's hard to imagine, talented as they were and are, that they would have any impact in a situation like today, where there are so many fine photographers actively and visibly working. For each good photographer, there are likely dozens also doing good and similar work. How do you navigate such a field when seeking who to represent? Do you leave it to serendipity?
I love that question. Thank you, Matthew. So, I think the big difference is that back in the day, when people such as Robert Frank, Helen Levitt, Lee Friedlander, William Eggleston were making work, they were working with analog equipment. And so that's a really specific commitment. Working with film cameras was expensive, and it's still expensive. And then most people had to go into the darkroom unless you hired someone else to make your prints. You had to go into a darkroom and print your work. And so just the amount of financial commitment to that, and then the amount of commitment to just your man hours and labor just separated out a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people are like, you know what, I don't want to spend like half my life in a dark room inhaling chemicals. And now with digital technology, it's just it's just so much easier. And so that thing that separated people out just based on commitment is not there anymore. And it's just the barrier to entry is just so much lower. And so we do have way more photographers. I mean, it's sort of astonishing how many people think of themselves as photographers.
Right.
As far as how I navigate that when looking for people to represent, Matthew asks, do you leave it to serendipity? And if I'm being really honest, there is a certain amount of serendipity, of course. Mm-hmm. There's no question that, sometimes I'll see work that I really like, but it's similar to someone else I represent. And so, I don't wind up working with that person because I already work with someone who's similar, and it was just a matter of timing. And look, that's life, right? I mean, a lot of life just comes down to timing. And I do like to think that eventually if people are really committed and continue to do really fantastic work, they will get recognized. The ship may have sailed on working with me, but I don't think anyone needs to cry over that. There's plenty of wonderful people. And as we were just talking about, there's a lot of ways of sort of taking control of your own destiny in our world now. So I hope that answers the question.
And if I could add on just a little bit, maybe because there is so much more out there, the level of commitment, the level of work, has to be more or has to be different?
Well, there may be a different, I don't know about this, but there's certainly the amount of work you have to do to be great and the amount of work you have to do to, introduce your work to the world is, I don't know if it's exponentially more or not. I'm sure it was always really difficult to get noticed. But yes, I'm sure that's the case. But there is a glut of sort of, mediocre work right now. I mean, that's true. I mean, look, the camera, I always say to people, if you want to be a great photographer, stop relying on your camera. That's the first thing you need to do. And you have to really embrace that very simple concept. Do not rely on your camera to make the work, because
you've had that conversation about layers quite a few times, but particularly just in our last episode with Alejandro Cartagena. That's
right. So the camera can't be the camera will make a great photograph if you have a great camera, but that's not what makes someone a great artist. So yeah.
All right. Well, I think we covered that.
Yep. Let's move on.
All right. The next question is from Ryan. What would you recommend for someone who considers themselves to be a very serious, hardworking, and passionate photographer, but has zero credentials, no degrees in photo, no gallery representation, no exhibitions, but would like to get their work out there, be seen, make connections with people, and make a reputable contribution to the medium? And there's definitely a little relationship to the last question in that one.
Yeah, and also on, earlier talking about making books and whatnot. I think books are the best sort of entry place right now. But, look, I don't think everyone takes the same road. I think there's lots of ways to sort of, go on this journey. And I don't know any serious curator, whether that curator is also an art dealer or a museum curator, who gives a rat's ass what your resume is if they love the work. Period. I don't have anything else to say about that. If the work is great, it just does not matter where it came from.
I think if there is anything that matters about that MFA and where you went, it's possibly the networking. It's possibly the connections you made while you were there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, and Danielle Bowman and I talked about that in an earlier episode. I mean, going to one of the MFA programs where every one of your professors is incredibly famous helps. There's no question. Let's not pretend that's not the case. But, if I see great work, I don't care where it comes from.
All right. Okay, so this is from Jordan. For the people who didn't take the traditional route and go to school, what should we focus on? I feel like I can't read and I'm trying to make it into a distinguished literary club.
Okay, well, Jordan, thanks for the question. I think everyone's perfectly capable of learning about the history of their medium on their own. But, there's no question that there's sort of like a canon that the giants of our industry that people would study. I think that's changing and becoming more inclusive. So I think that's really good news. But, I don't have an art history degree myself. Yeah, I mean, I went from getting a creative writing degree to a film degree, filmmaking, studied a ton of photography from the time I was young. But, everything I know about fine art photography is self-taught. For better or worse. But I don't, I don't really feel self-conscious myself. I mean, I'm sure that if I went and got a degree that there'd be a lot I could learn, but I don't, I feel like I do a lot of homework and I'm perfectly capable of doing that. And so, I put aside a certain amount of time every week to read through some photo essay books, and, I'm a big fan, everyone knows this, of Robert Adams' writing on photography. But there's a lot of really great writing on photography, and then just looking at pictures. And, I have a big photo book collection, obviously. Maybe it's not obvious, but I do. And, and I look through pictures a lot. And I think it's really important when you're looking at pictures and however you're looking at them, whether it's in an exhibition or in a photo book, I try and think a lot about when I don't like something almost as much as when I do, because I think it's just important. It's like you just be really thorough. So, when you're flipping through a book, don't just flip through it. Really think about, why is this image good? Why do I think this image is good? What are all the reasons that I think this image works? What are the reasons why I think this image doesn't work? Just try and really push yourself. And I think you can do it on your own.
Yeah. And, Jordan's question also makes me think about those conversations that we've had in terms of, community, right? And that you don't have to be in this alone, right? And if it helps to try to find that community where you can sort of support each other and be influenced by what others are influenced by, right? By other people are influenced by.
I'm a huge believer in community. I mean, I'm like obsessed with the concept of collaboration. And collaboration, can mean not only different things to different people, but it can also mean different things in different contexts. I mean, so you and I are collaborating on this podcast. I collaborate with my artists when I'm editing their work. I'm not the author, but I'm collaborating. I'm giving them my input. Book editors are collaborating. When I used to make films, my costume designer, set designer were my collaborators. If you're in a critique group and you're greatly influenced by the people in your critique group, then they're your collaborators. So I'm just all in on collaboration. I do not believe in the lone genius. You can come up with exceptions to the rule, but to me, the rule is that people make their best work in dialogue with other people. So, anyone is capable of finding their, those people.
Yeah.
This is just about commitment, really.
Right.
I think.
All right. Okay, so this next question is from Stone. I think there's a huge question in a lot of artists' minds as to how to get your first solo show, your first book, your first publication, your first residency. It seems to follow that once you have one, the gates are more open to further ones. How does the art world arrive at opening the gates beyond the provenance of the artist versus the work itself?
So I think what Stone's asking is how do you get sort of past, entry into the club, which the idea is that the first something will get you that entry. And I think we've talked about this in different ways. But, I will just come back around to something we were just touching on, which is, networking. Networking is so unbelievably important that, if I could somehow use a highlighter pen to highlight this sentence, and when you were listening to this, it would somehow pop out and you'd see it underlined.
Should I add stadium reverb to it?
Oh my God, I love this idea. Yes.
Yes.
Networking is so important. I do want to be mindful of the fact that a lot of people don't have easy networking opportunities because they're not in major fine art photo cities. But you have to do your best to work around that. And there are ways of doing that. So one of the most sort of the ways most people take advantage of are portfolio reviews. Portfolio reviews happen all over the world. And there's a lot of fantastic ones. And they are just big networking opportunities. That's what they are. Do you get your work critiqued? Yes. Is it helpful to get your work critiqued by some fantastic book editor or some art dealer? Yes. But the thing that's really happening at portfolio reviews is networking. You are meeting people. And, I have met so many people at portfolio reviews that, and let me add one other thing, another really great thing, because what I'm about to say will apply to this as well. Another really wonderful place to meet people where the door is open to anyone are big art fairs, particularly where there are book sections. So Perry Photo and Perry Photo New York, they have these huge book sections, at the fair. And the book sections are basically hangout lounges.
Yes, they're my favorite spots in those places.
It is so fun. And it's just a great way to meet people. And, that may mean, taking a deep breath and walking up to someone and introducing yourself. So the easiest way to meet people is that you're hanging out with someone who knows someone, and then you meet, that sort of domino thing. But even if you show up totally by yourself, you can walk up to someone and introduce yourself. And you're not asking for something in that moment. You're simply introducing yourself. I'm a fan of what you do. I love your work, whatever it is. But these are building blocks to relationships. And so this is a commitment, networking. There needs to be some authenticity and sincerity in that meet and greet moment.
You should really admire what they do.
That's right. Exactly. You're not just sort of trying to grab something from someone. It needs to be a bit more nuanced than that. But I have met so many people at portfolio reviews and at art fairs that I have wound up either working with or forming very close mentoring relationships with. So this isn't something that happens occasionally. This is something that happens all the time. In that way, we have something in the photo community that a lot of artists don't have. Like, painters and people in other mediums don't have these portfolio review. This is this thing that's in the photo world and is so, so, so valuable. So I really urge people to take advantage of them.
Yeah, and one of the things I learned from the last SPE conference is that it's actually fun to be on both sides of the table if you really are, meeting people and introducing yourself to people who you do truly admire.
Absolutely.
Whether you're on one side of the table looking at work or the other side of the table presenting work, it can be a really great experience.
Yes, absolutely.
People want to be generous. Like they want to be generous, when they're looking at your work. So it can be a really good experience.
Yep, for sure. I mean, I'll tell you something. I don't know if she remembers this, but Leslie Martin, who's the creative director of Aperture, who I've had on the podcast and is one of my absolute closest friends in the world. I first met Leslie because I introduced myself to her. I mean, that's what happened. She was very well known and I was And I was at an Aperture function. I went up and I just introduced myself. And, that was like the beginning. And then I saw her again a couple weeks later and yada, yada. And then another time. And we became good friends. And, she, brought my book, Photo Work, to Aperture, pitched it. And we've done a lot of fun things together over the years. And and she also, by the way, is often recommending artists for me to look at their work, and I'm often sending artists her way for her to look at work. We are constantly, not just Leslie and I, but all my friends in the industry, we're constantly sharing work with each other of artists that we like. So
and that's that building
it's a super
block,
big
right?
It's a super big part of the collegiate sort of experience.
Exactly.
And by collegiate, I mean colleagues. Yeah.
Right. Not academia. Right.
No.
All right. This is from Julie Ray. Hi, Sasha. I really enjoy the work you do. If I'm not too late, can you speak about how to get in contact with art book folks to pitch an idea to them and or how to pitch an idea? Thank you so much.
Yep, sure, Julie Ray. This is going to be probably my shortest answer. It's a really good question, but it's quite simple. Most galleries and publishers are much easier this way, but if you go to their website, they have submission guidelines on their website. So all you have to do is submit your work. Great small/medium-sized publishers like TBW, TIS, my friend Kris Graves, KGP. These guys all take submissions. So this is great news because it's completely democratic. You don't have to know anyone. You don't have to have gone to any fancy school. You don't have to live in New York City. You don't have to do a million things. You just have to submit good work. And they'll be really interested in seeing it. So again, coming back around to what I was talking about earlier about the importance of small book publishers right now. Just to me, the most important sort of cog in our wheel.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only impediment would be make sure you check their websites and do it exactly right.
Yeah, and have a sense that they'll be interested. It's the right match for you. But I don't want to belabor this because I think it's really that simple.
All right. So this next one is from Lars. Hi, Sasha. I would be interested to know if you can see any trends in the buying behavior of your clients, such as sizes, prices, or themes. Really looking forward to the next episode. Love both the book and the podcast a lot.
Well, thank you, Lars. Yep. So there have been trends over the years. They're sort of hard. They're not always easy to see right as they're starting. It's sort of sometimes easier almost in the rearview mirror. But, one like really obvious trend to me, doesn't have to be obvious to you, but that came up a number of years ago was the sort of renewed interest in process work. And there was a lot of discussion about this at the time. And by process work, I mean non-camera work, so photograms, chemograms, that type of work. And, I think a lot of us have sort of believe that this was a pushback against digital, that clients were interested in seeing the hand more in the work. You saw, I think of Yossi Milo, the wonderful Chelsea dealer who represents a lot of process artists. And, he definitely was someone who was really excited about it and sort of, very involved with this type of work. And I would say he has a number of very well-known artists who are doing process work, but I'll just mention one, and that's Alison Rossiter. And when Yossi started working with Alison, it was right at this time when you were really just seeing this come on. He represents Marco Breuer, Chris McCaw, and others. And I represent two process artists, one who's all process, Chuck Kelton, and the other is sort of 50-50, and that's Caleb Sharland. And I love working with this type of work. It's unique. The prints are unique, and they are very handmade feeling. So that was like a big trend. I think it continues to this day. But, and yes, there are many trends that happen. Like there was the Dusseldorf school you saw a lot of work in that sort of Thomas Struth, sort of very almost didactic, very cool, emotionally distant, extremely formal type of work. You saw a lot of that, in the 90s, early 2000s. And so you do see trends like that come and go. But Lars, I don't think there's any big trends right now as far as sizing, prices, very specific themes. I don't feel that for sure clients have, embraced bigger and bigger pieces since I've been, I sell work that's, as big as 74 inches across now, which is enormous.
You have to transport that?
Oh my God, that's a whole nother show. But yeah, I think that sort of nitty gritty stays the same.
It goes a little bit back to Matthew's question about there being so many photographers now, right? And so much good work out there. Is that it just seems like there's a lot of everything happening all at once. Right?
There is. I think that's exactly right. There's a lot of everything. And different dealers work with different material that they feel connected to, I mean, everyone knows that, I work with a lot of, sort of what we call straight photography. I don't work with too much very sort of fanciful stuff or fantasy or highly, highly conceptual or, work that's, too cool. I'm more of a romantic.
Yeah. Actually, a friend of mine messaged me a question for you, and it kind of is along those lines. And we got this question from several people. I'll just mention Andrew because he's a friend of mine now.
Yeah.
How do you select the people you would like to represent? And sort of to add on to that a little bit, how do you know when you've taken on too much or you need to take on more?
Well, yes, those are good questions. So I find artists to represent in every way imaginable. I've not yet started working with anyone whose work I've seen on Instagram, but I've seen plenty of work on Instagram that I've really loved and gone to the artist's website. And I would have no problem. I mean, that's, who cares? Like, again, it's like, it doesn't matter how you get to someone. So I'm sure someday everything will fall into place for it to come about that way, where I see something on Instagram and I wind up working with someone. But right now, I look at work on Instagram. I get a ton of recommendations from, colleagues to look at work. I watch who wins awards, who wins Guggenheims, who does important residencies. I look at books that are, being published by a lot of these small book publishers that I've been talking about a lot today. Mm-hmm. And I meet people at portfolio reviews. I meet, every way. That's how I find my artists. All of these ways, they all work. I don't care. There's no preference. There's no good way or bad way. I mean, when I see great work, it's just thrilling. So, sorry, was there a second part to that question? Yes. Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a little tired, I guess. So I represent 15 photographers now, and I don't feel like I can represent anymore. So there's work out there that I really love, and I try my best to be helpful to those people whose work I really love and who I really believe in. And I do sell work by people who I don't represent. So wow. That's a little known fact. So that's a little bit of inside baseball nugget that I just letting you all in on. So if I see work that I really love, but I don't feel like I can represent the person, either because I feel overcommitted, I just don't feel like I can add anyone else to the roster, or because the work is too similar to someone else who I already represent, but I know I have a client who would love it, I will contact that person and ask them if they want me to try and sell their work. I mean, it's almost always happens with people I already have relationships with. I don't think I've ever called someone I've never met. In fact, I know I haven't. But, in fact, again, I don't want to name names, but about a month ago, I just committed to trying to sell some work for someone who doesn't have a dealer who I really, really admire, and I'm going to give it my best shot. And I think that they're doing important work, and I'd like to try and help out. So, but for sure, like, I have to be careful about, I think at one point I represented like 21 artists, and for me, I was completely overwhelmed. Wow. And I felt like a failure all the time, like I was constantly letting people down because I couldn't be working for everyone at the same time. It was just too much. And so I cut back.
Knowing your limits.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You just mentioned two things that I think we should add to the mix that I think that relates to many of the questions we've got. And there was one question from Ian also about, if you don't have an MFA background, how can you get your work out there? Or the other thing you just mentioned were residencies and workshops. And, I speak to a lot of artists who just had, some of the most amazing experiences and networking experiences too from these other organizations.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is all networking, but residencies are fantastic. I think the moral of that in a way is that things operate on multiple layers. So you go to a residency to work on a project, but while you're there, you meet a lot of people, know? It's like what I was saying about portfolio reviews. You're getting your work reviewed, but you're meeting a lot of people. Like, these are all, have more than one function.
That's right.
Which is great. It's really great, right? I mean, That's just such a wonderful thing that things can give you so much. There's more than one gift.
Yeah, and from what I've been hearing about the way residencies are dealing with COVID is that they've lowered the prices and made them more widely available for attendance for people who would like to join, because they're doing it virtually. So they're saving a lot of money on renting a space and all those things. So it'll be a different experience, but there might even be more availability right now and more affordability.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I definitely, like, this is not the ideal time.
No, right.
Right. But there are no portfolio reviews happening in person. But I think that, we're going to be coming out of this in the next 6-8 months. And so life will get back to a more normal place. And
at least when it comes to looking at work.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So, well, I think that's probably we don't want to overload people, so maybe we should stop here. But
there was a lot of good stuff. I think a lot of great questions and
questions, and people can keep sending them, and we'll do our best to respond either in the show, thank people, and
I can link to some of the things we mentioned in the show notes.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah, we did throw out a bunch of names of things and whatnot, so we'll try and get some of those resources, in the show notes. And let me just say one last thing. I've asked this before, and I appreciate the people who did it. But if you do like the podcast, and I think a lot of you do because you're listening, and we get a ton of fan mail. Thank you. It's, as I always say, we really appreciate it. But can you please, I'm begging you people, this is me, Sasha, begging. Can you please rate the podcast on wherever you can, which I think is Apple and Spotify, because it's just going to help us, reach a few more people. It is meaningful. I know it's a pain in the behind, but it just be a favor to us, and I think Michael and I both be really appreciative.
Yeah. You don't even have to comment. Just hit those stars.
Right. Exactly. And okay, that's all I'll say. Well, thank you, Michael, so much for doing this with me today.
Yes, well, thank you for being my guest on your show.
Yeah, you bet, man. I would say any time, but I don't mean it. And, I don't like to be insincere. We've got some great shows coming up, though. We have Richard Rinaldi, Julian Laub, Doug Dubois. So we've got some great shows. We're going to get back to the artists. And anyway, thanks so much. Until next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Photo Work with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The executive producer is Sasha Wolf, and our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. You can hear Photo Work on all your favorite podcast platforms. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify, and be sure to subscribe on any one of those services or wherever you listen to podcasts.